Everyone ready to talk about trees? Okay, I was gonna say if you aren't, then you might want to check which room you're in because right there. But anyway, hello, I'm Mira and I'm a technical artist with the SpeedTree team at Unity. So we wear a lot of different hats on the SpeedTree team, but I'm mostly building the SpeedTree library, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. But before we get to trees, I actually want to talk a little bit about some robots. Now, what are you even looking at? Well, to give you some context, I pulled this picture from deep in the depths of my camera roll, and it's from when I was rendering out my final semester project for the first modeling and animation course that I took in university. Now, this was at the end of the semester, and that class, let me tell you, it ended up being way more of a challenge than I had anticipated originally. But actually, I want to take you back to the beginning, where we were first coming up with our stories and planning our models. And our professor told us that we simply had to follow 3 rules. Rule 1, our main character had to be a robot. Rule 2, the robot had to encounter a problem. And rule 3, the robot had to either find a solution or fail to solve the problem. Other than that, we were told we could do whatever we wanted. That is, until we apparently started to get a little too ambitious. You see, there were some things that some of us students wanted to model at that time. And upon hearing what we wanted to do, our professor ultimately had to crush our dreams of creativity and create Rule 4. What was Rule 4, you might ask? Rule 4 boiled down to no trees. Now, why weren't we allowed to create trees? Well, who here has seen a tree? No one's raising. Okay, I see one person knows what a tree is. If you haven't seen them, go outside. Not right now, it's raining, but they're great. They're these big green giant things. Fantastic, check them out. But for those of you who have seen a tree, somehow it didn't occur to me back then in that class, but trees are dang complicated. I mean, in a way, they're deceptively simple, but the fact of the matter is that modeling a tree is hard. You've got a lot of organic shapes, tons of little parts, and that's to say nothing about even animating this thing, right? Unless you think your work is done there. To make an environment, you're going to need multiple trees, or bushes, or flowers, or grass, whatever you're making. And so I think my professor knew that if he tried to let us box model from this to this, it probably would have ended up looking a bit more like that. So where do you guys come in? Well, while modeling a tree in general is hard, the fact is creating trees for real time can be even harder. You have a whole host of unique problems. You still have all those little parts, but you need to optimize them for performance, and the same for your wind animation and things like overdraw. And all of this can be boiled down to the fact that we're dealing with limited resources, right? So 2 big categories, for example, are our time. When we're creating, when we're iterating, and even just the tedious little tasks like exporting, all that adds up. So we need tools that give us more flow and less friction, right? And the other big limitation is our tech. I won't harp on this. You know that at least for now, we are limited by our hardware. So just try not to set any CPUs on fire, yeah? So with all this in mind, we know that trees and vegetation can start to add up quickly and drain on our resources. So how do we tackle the tree problem? Well, you all know what room you're in. Today, we're going to talk about how we can solve this with SpeedTree. Now, I already gave myself a quick introduction earlier, but just to say hello again, I am Mira, and I'm a technical artist with the SpeedTree team. And just to give you a bit more about my background, I actually started with SpeedTree as an intern right after I took that first modeling animation course. And let me tell you, it was really cool and empowering to go from being forbidden from making, even having the thought of making any sort of plant, to being able to create things like this. And so today I want to introduce you guys to this tool that I have become so passionate about and hopefully inspire you to enhance your own environments and see what you can create for your own projects. So let's get into it. Where are we going today? Well, first, we're just going to go over some quick tips and tricks for getting started and getting your SpeedTrees into Unity. So we'll take a quick look at the SpeedTree library and, again, some Unity integration tips. Next, we will dive deeper into actually creating in the SpeedTree modeler. And then we'll also talk about that tech piece of the puzzle and spend a little bit of time talking about optimizing for your game or whatever project you're working on. And while today's session has a lot of stuff for those of you who are newer to the SpeedTree family, if you are a veteran, do not worry, because we will also talk about the latest things that we're most excited for you guys to try out in SpeedTree 10. Does that sound good to you guys? Okay, sweet, I see some thumbs up. So jumping into some tips and tricks on getting started. I mentioned just a minute ago that we need tools that are flexible to our needs, right? I'm willing to bet that none of your projects, unless you're on the same team, obviously, are exactly alike. So where SpeedTree really shines, in my opinion, is in its flexibility. So for example, we can use SpeedTree to scale with our ambition and our resources. So we might just want to work with pre-made models, or we can go completely custom blank file, or somewhere in the middle. We can leverage the power of procedural modeling and the art directability of freehand creation. Another example of flexibility, we can do realistic foliage, or we can do stylized. And you can even blend the two. I'll show you what I mean a bit more later. And one more thing is, in terms of optimizing, we can do a higher, more detailed poly count for a hero tree. If we wanted to, we could go to a VFX tree, but that might be for a different talk. Or we can scale down really tiny to something for a mobile game. So what does all of this look like in practice? Well, first I want you to remember these are just a few examples, but let's go through these a bit more. So let's start with this one, pre-made model versus completely custom. And what I want you to ask yourself is, do you always need a custom tree or bush or flower or what have you, whatever you want? And the answer is no, right? Like sometimes it's just a random Tuesday afternoon. You got 8 hours to start prototyping your level design. And in that case, I don't think you're going to want to start like making everything, from the ground up. So in a case like this is a great time to use pre-made models. Where can you get pre-made models? Well, a great resource is the SpeedTree library. So SpeedTree is not just a modeling software. We have a few different products, and one of those is the SpeedTree library. So here you can find a range of different plants, not just trees, from tons of different biomes, and we're always adding more. So you can find something for your project to get you started. You can either use these out of the box, or you can mix them up to make them your own. Now, to get our models into Unity, whether we're working with pre-mades or working with our own models, we will need to do one little thing, which is export. Now, why am I stopping on a tedious little task like exporting? I'm sure that it's everyone's favorite thing to do, right? Well, I want to bring this up because SpeedTree is actually a middleware. So you can take SpeedTrees into many different applications. It's agnostic, essentially. So here's our export dialog. And we know this can get tedious really fast. So we have some things to make this easier for you. If you were listening really closely in the keynote, you might have heard them talk about in Fantasy Kingdom how they packaged everything up into one lookup. So you can do that too, super easy with the Unity export presets. So you see here that we've got a couple for you, and one of them is a one draw call option. So if you need to package up all of your textures and your wind really tiny, that's a fantastic option for you to use. Another thing that we can leverage is combined exporting. So this means that we can open up several models that we want to bring into our scene, and SpeedTree can combine all of them, all the textures, into one atlas. So when we do that, we'll watch it and I'll click the box at some point. But see, everything's combined into one atlas. And if you want to, you can edit your atlas. But maybe for now, you're just happy with the default and you're ready to export from there. So once we get everything into Unity, we can simply drag and drop like any other prefab. So pretty basic, but just want to show you that SpeedTrees integrate seamlessly into Unity. Now, for library models, LODs and wind are ready to go out of the box. But if it is another day where you're making your own stuff, I promise that this stuff is not difficult to start setting up yourself. We also have a new wind importer. So you'll get this new wind importer if you use our new wind algorithm, the game's wind algorithm. And this just gives you a few more settings to play around with directly in the editor. So you don't have to go back and forth between the SpeedTree modeler and the Unity editor to change up your wind settings. So you can go from a breeze to a hurricane and see it there within the editor. Okay, so now we know about the SpeedTree library and some quick tricks to get you up and running in Unity. But what if it is a day where you do actually want to create something? Well, let's start talking about the meat and potatoes of the SpeedTree, which is the SpeedTree modeler. So back to this slide, we're going to group a couple of these concepts together, and I'll show you what I mean. So how do we actually model in SpeedTree? Well, at its core, we are taking template parts called generators and stacking them together. And all of these generators stacked together create what we call a tree hierarchy. And what I want you to notice is that, each of those generators is controlling a different part of the tree. So the trunk or the big branches or the leaves, what have you, whatever. But what I do want you to notice is that in this GIF on the right, and I know some of you are probably like cringing because I said GIF, but if you want to change my mind after the talk, you can try to change me to GIF. Anyway, I digress. You can see that it doesn't take that many generators to make a really solid tree. Often simplicity in SpeedTree will get you a really long way. Of course, you can go crazy, but you can keep it simple. Okay, so generators, building with template parts, and you can keep it simple. So how are we actually shaping our tree? So when we click on our generator, we are given a set of properties, and we can adjust those properties to shape our tree. Then we can use curves. So if you're familiar with curves in any other application, this is a similar concept. We can use curves to refine the shape of our tree. Now, how many of y'all are familiar with procedural modeling, proceduralism? Okay, awesome. So that's exactly what this is. At the core of SpeedTree is procedural modeling. And what's great about procedural modeling is that because we're just working essentially with numbers and SpeedTree is, the underlying algorithm is just, all these different mathematical equations, it can take what we build and we can use this cool little button called the randomize button. So SpeedTree is able to take all of those numbers and just shift them a little bit and spit out a tree that looks like it's part of the same species that we just created, but is completely unique. So I don't know about you, but I love doing the work once and getting infinite variations just like that. So this is the power of procedural modeling and what makes it so great. Another huge part of SpeedTree's workflow is the fact that we are working non-destructively. So when we make changes to our model, if we change our mind later, we can always go back to our original work. So if you droop the branches one day and you want to change it back, no problem. So remember, SpeedTree at its core, we're modeling procedurally, and pretty much whatever we're doing in SpeedTree is non-destructive. Okay. Now I asked you guys this earlier, but I'm going to ask a similar question again, which is, with all this in mind, you have the modeling basics. Do you always want to work from scratch? And yes, some days you do. You need to start completely from the ground up. But actually, it can be really advantageous to recycle parts wherever you can. Like I told you earlier, I work on the SpeedTree library, and so I'm often recycling as much as I can to save me time. So one example of this is if we build one tree procedurally, we can easily scale those properties up and down to make variations, a big version or down to a seedling of our tree. And then of course, we can randomize those too. So that saves us a lot of time. When I make one tree, all these variations take me a fraction of the time to make. Another version of recycling is taking a model that already exists and changing it up. And you can do this by using models from the SpeedTree library. So here, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun and take this aspen from the SpeedTree library. And so far, we've seen a lot of realistic vegetation, right? But I'm willing to bet that some of you are working on stylized projects. So what I thought we could do is we could take this aspen and stylize it. So what are we actually going to do? Well, we're going to keep the structure of the aspen, but we'll first swap out our materials. So here's what we're starting with. We have a leaf scan that we have baked into a leaf cluster and applied to our tree. So how do we stylize this? Well, we actually can just take a pretty simple color map and opacity map that you can make in any application and apply it to the tree. So what will this look like? Well, let's drag and drop and find out. There we go. So the GIF is going to loop, but you can see that just by swapping out those leaves, it's already starting to look a little bit stylized. So we can do the same thing with the bark. I just swapped it out for a simple color map. For time, we'll just kind of skip over that. And then I adjusted the orientation of the leaves and the branches just to suit the stylized leaves a bit more. But you can see essentially by just swapping out the materials and doing a few procedural tweaks, we already have a stylized tree. That doesn't seem too bad, right? But what if we want to get a little bit more funky? Maybe we have some concept art and we have some funky bends in our trunk. How would we do this? Well, we could tackle this procedurally. That would look like adding a noise property to our trunk, and that's great if you don't care where the bends go. But what if you're working like with hero concept art, right? And you want to be very precise about your bends. Well, that would be a great case to use SpeedTree's freehand tools. So there are several freehand tools, and I'll just show you one of them right now, which is the bend tool. And what's great about the freehand tools is they allow you to manipulate your tree directly in the screen space. And again, I keep saying tree, but this applies to anything if you're making a flower or a bush or whatever. So we can add some fun stylized bends to our aspen. I said precise earlier. I wasn't being too precise here, but I think you will forgive me. But another important thing about freehand tools is that, oh, well, first, I just changed the season because we're going into fall, so seemed appropriate. But one important thing about working with freehand tools and working procedurally is that we can still make procedural edits after we've made freehand edits. So you can blend back and forth between the two. Now, I told you earlier that one important concept in SpeedTree is working non-destructively, and that applies to freehand edits too. So even if you save out your file and you come back months later and you want to take out those bends, straight trunk right at your fingertips, no problem. But I'm gonna stick the bends back in there and do a few more procedural edits. And this is what we've come up with. We could stop here, but I'm gonna show you one more thing for stylizing, which is lighting. So I'm going to switch on the normal maps just so you can see. And with normal maps too, we're still just working with procedural properties. Now I'm just kind of playing around here, but in the last year, we added easier options for stylized lighting called global lighting. And one option is we can add in a mesh around our tree and project our normals out to that mesh. And the advantage of this for stylizing is that it can give us a really nice, evenly lit, puffy tree. So I'll give you a side-by-side. Here's local lighting on the left. That's what you're probably going to use when you're lighting a realistic tree. And here's global lighting on the right with the projected normals. Now, it's easier to see in the normal maps, but I know it's kind of subtle in this specific example. So let me show you one more where it's a bit more obvious. So here's another tree that's stylized, and you can see a big difference between using those projected normals and the local lighting. But what you saw in the video, even though I sped it up a little bit, it's exactly what you would do. It's just editing some procedural properties, adding in one mesh. Okay, so let's look at where we started. We started with our realistic aspen, and what did we do? We swapped out the materials. We did a few procedural edits, added in some freehand bends, and then we swapped our lighting from local lighting to global lighting. And that's where we ended up. So you can see that you can take what we make for you in the SpeedTree library and pretty easily switch it up to suit your needs. But of course, I don't have to be making something like this. I could be making something like this, you know, Gothic mansion set piece. Or I could be making a suite of cactuses. Or I could be making something completely alien. What I hope you're starting to pick up is that there is a lot of variety for what you can do in SpeedTree. And this is still just the tip of the iceberg. So with all of this in mind, would you guys like to have a little bit more fun? Sweet. Well, now is a great time to share some of what we're most excited for you guys to try out in SpeedTree 10. So SpeedTree 10 just released a month ago, so it's still pretty fresh. And I just want to, let's just imagine a little bit together. Let's say that you're a vegetation artist and your art lead comes to you. And they're like, okay, we've got this concept for a tree. What we want you to do is make a tree, and it's gonna be a spooky, antlered forest guardian guy thing. Okay, what does that even mean? Well, you being fantastic tech artist that you are, say, no problem, I got you, I can do that. So let's say that you decide to break this down into a couple of parts. You decide, I'm actually just going to put aside the foliage for now and focus on the base of the tree. And you decide, it's easiest for me to sculpt this in a sculpting application. And here's what you come up with. Spooky forest guardian guy. Pretty sweet. So with that done, you are ready to move on to your upper canopy. And you just got back from a fun conference somewhere and you heard about this nifty tool called SpeedTree. Oh, what do you know? And you think to yourself, okay, I would love to go try adding a canopy to my custom mesh in SpeedTree. So you import your custom mesh into the SpeedTree modeler. Well, I'm actually going to give you guys a quick history lesson. So working with meshes has been part of SpeedTree since SpeedTree 9. And what people often would really use it for was bringing in photogrammetry chunks. So if you want really hyper-realistic chunks, you can bring those into SpeedTree and build off of them procedurally. But a limitation of that workflow was that it was really suited for trunks that were pretty normal, straight up and down. If you wanted to bring in a custom mesh like this guy, and then tried to start attaching generators to him, trust me, it wasn't going to work out that well. So what did we do in SpeedTree 10? Well, we created a new workflow called Mesh Spines. And what Mesh Spines does is it allows you to add a procedural spine anywhere on your custom mesh that you want. So you can see I'm just clicking along the custom mesh, sending out a spine. And what this means is that that antler is now essentially a procedural SpeedTree branch. So all these spines, we can add procedural SpeedTree geometry. So you can take your custom mesh and turn it into a full-fledged SpeedTree. So we'll just watch together and just see our beautiful custom creation start to take shape, take form. We can add our leaves, add in some bends. We can have a little fun, add in some pine cones, and maybe some mushrooms, some roots, all that good stuff. So, your art lead. He loves it. Fantastic. Great job. Give yourselves a pat on the back. But, you know, one thing that we would love for that tree to do is, could you maybe add some wind to it? And you think, sure, I know SpeedTree has wind. I'll go see what I can do. Again, quick history lesson. So this is SpeedTree 9, and you'll actually notice that the interface is different. In SpeedTree 10, we gave everything a nice modern refresh. But in SpeedTree 9, if you brought your custom mesh in and tried to apply wind, it's just going to look kind of like a big blob. And it's fine for a straight normal trunk because it's just applying it up and down. But again, multi-tiered custom mesh, different story. So in SpeedTree 10, we gave you the ability to essentially group vertices together and apply custom wind weights on your mesh. So once you have applied your custom wind weights, SpeedTree will take that into account in the wind algorithm, and everything can move with a lovely bit of separation and just look very clean, blowing in the breeze. All right, your art lead. Again, thrilled. Go take lunch. But when you get back from lunch, we would love to add just a little bit more pizzazz. Could you maybe, I don't know, add some vines? All right, so you guys know the drill now? History lesson, woohoo! So vines have been part of SpeedTree for a long time, but they were best suited for crawling up stuff, crawling over stuff. Think ivy, think a strangler fig, or a garden trellis like this. What was a more involved workflow was trying to create swooping, droopy, jungly sort of vines. So we changed that in SpeedTree 10 with the vine generator. Now the vine generator is really fun. We would love the video to play, wouldn't we? The vine generator is fun because it produces physically based vines. So we can add the vine generator to our tree, and we have to change one setting to make it more suited for real-time use, just to make it a little bit more lightweight. But from there, just like any other piece of geometry in SpeedTree, we're just changing our procedural properties, and we can affect the amount of droop that is applied to the vines. If these went all the way down to the floor, they would spread out along the floor because they're physically based. All right, so we have a little bit more pizzazz to our tree. Everything's fantastic. But you didn't think we were done, did you? No. So look, the tree looks great, fantastic, but it's looking just a little bit dense. We kind of just want to break up the silhouette a little bit. Does that sound, can you do that? Can you just break it up a little bit? Well, don't sweat it. Even if it's 4:55 on a Friday afternoon, you're like, I gotta get out the door, like I got places to be. Because in SpeedTree 10, one other thing we added is a new freehand tool called Trim Brush. So the Trim Brush is really fun because it allows us to just essentially take a pair of gardening shears and create wild shapes on our tree. So this is fantastic if you're trying to create a really custom shape, or if you just need to cut out some stragglers. Or I had someone come up to me yesterday, and he was saying, in our town we have trees and we carve out part of the tree in a rectangular shape so that the cars can go through. Well, this is a perfect application of the trim brush. So you can see we had cut up, gave our tree a haircut, and a few months later, our art lead comes back, everything's great. We can tell it's a few months later because his buzz cut has grown out a bit. And he loves the tree, but he has one more question, which is, can you actually put all those leaves back? Well, I hope you guys have been listening, because remember, don't sweat through your shirt, because SpeedTree is non-destructive. So even if you've saved out your file, you're coming back months later, you can untrim all those branches and get all of your original work back. All right, so with all of that, we have turned our custom mesh into a fully fledged SpeedTree. And we could just admire the fruits of our labor. So quick recap, some of the things we're most excited for in SpeedTree 10 are mesh spines. So this essentially allows you to take any piece of hand-created custom geometry and turn it into a fully fledged SpeedTree. And also, you can apply custom wind to those meshes. Then we also have the vine generator, which creates physically based vines that can droop and swag and swoop and interact with your model and with the ground. And then we also have the trim brush, which allows you to freehand shape your models. And remember, it's all non-destructive, so you can always get your original work back. All right. We have covered a lot. So let's do a quick check-in. So we talked at the very beginning about how we need flexibility, right? So we've talked about how we can use pre-made models, or like we just saw, how we can go with the most custom of custom meshes. We've talked about how we can leverage procedural modeling and freehand tools. We've seen how we can make realistic foliage or stylized, or how we can even blend between the two and start with one and go to the other potentially. So the last little slider here that we haven't really talked about is this hero to mobile slider. So now is a great time for us to transition into talking about poly count and more generally into optimizing for your project. So on the topic of poly count, you can see here that in SpeedTree, we can make a whole host of different levels of detail for our model. So I just stuck a VFX tree in here for fun. But I'll swap these into scribed mode so you can see the polygons and get an idea of the different densities. So we can go from a VFX tree in the millions, but then for games, we're looking more in the thousands down to mobile, really tiny, under 5K. So how do we actually go between these different segment counts? Well, you guys already know we're working procedurally. So it's the same thing for the segment counts. We are sliding our sliders and our polygons are being added to our branches, to our trunk, or being removed. SpeedTree also has some special properties that help us even more. You see in the GIF here, this is the optimization slider in action. And I love it because it detects where the bends are in your model, keeps the polygons there while cutting out the polygons in the straighter parts of your model. So it's essentially giving you the best bang for your buck. So this is how we work with branches, trunks, but how do we work with leaves? Well, in SpeedTree, we have a cutout editor. So you open up your material map, and just like our branches, we can edit how many vertices we are using with our materials or our leaf materials. And then we can send out different resolutions to use for our different LODs. Now, on the topic of LODs, we saw that a bit earlier, and I promised you that it's not too difficult to set those up yourself. It is really straightforward because you now know about procedural properties and working with curves. You'll probably be hearing the word procedural in your dreams tonight, so apologies for that. So when we add our LODs, we can add as many or as few as we want. We can preview them in the SpeedTree modeler. And we've already seen that when we export into Unity, they are going to work seamlessly. Now, another big thing is optimizing wind. We want our trees to move, but we know that that can get computationally heavy. So we're really excited because in SpeedTree 6, in Unity 6, we have a faster wind algorithm that you can use. It was previously only available in another certain game engine that we will not talk about. But it's a GPU-driven wind. And what's fantastic is that it's not only GPU-driven, but you can also leverage the GPU resident drawer for even more performance gains. So if you need everything to be very lightweight, this is an excellent option for you. But lest you worry about, okay, I'm getting more performance, it's more lightweight, that's great, but how does it actually look? Do not worry, because as long as you tune it well, you still get good visual quality from this lighter weight wind. So you can really have the best of both worlds. Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about in terms of optimizing is this. Now, anyone want to gander? What are we looking at? It's not a edgy vegetation boy band. I saw, yeah? Overdraw, yep. You got it. Yeah, fist bump, nice. So you can see that in overdraw mode, these specific models have a lot of hotspots. So I'm actually just going to break out one of these for you. Here's an aspen. I randomized it from earlier. And you can see that he has a lot of red going on. That's a problem. So we could tackle this a couple of different ways. We could use procedural properties and curves to kind of try and carve out some of those hotspots. Or we could node edit, which means, we would just click on individual leaf clusters and delete them. But that's going to take a lot of time. And procedural edits would have us risking losing the silhouette of our tree. So I want to share one more thing from SpeedTree 10 that we came up with to help with this problem, which is shade pruning. So shade pruning is essentially what it sounds like, kind of, an occlusion culling thing where, you step outside and you see the light shining from the sun. And what shade pruning it is going to do is find all those shaded parts of the tree on the interior and eliminate them, cut them out. And you can increase or decrease the strength of that culling. So this is great for two reasons. First of all, artistically, this can be great because it mimics how plants often grow, right? They want to get as much sunlight as they can, so they push more leaves to the outer edges. But for overdraw, this is fantastic because it helps us reduce overdraw while retaining the silhouette of our tree, which is really the most important thing that our player is going to see. So let's look at our aspen. Here's the before, and shade pruning essentially is just a button that you're going to press. Then you have a few other settings you can tweak. But if I just turn on the button, you can see that our overdraw has greatly reduced. And then we could, again, fiddle with the settings, try to target it more. But this is a pretty acceptable level generally for our overdraw. And you can see that our silhouette is preserved. Okay, so that was the last little thing for SpeedTree 10 I wanted to show you. So we are actually about ready to start wrapping up. So we started today with the tree problem. How do we deal with the problem of needing vegetation in our projects? But first, how do we reduce the strain on our time and on our hardware resources? Well, we know now that we can tackle this with SpeedTree. So what I want to leave you guys with is, remember, SpeedTree is super flexible. We saw a ton of examples of how it can be flexible for your needs. Another big thing is that we're working non-destructively. So if you decide later that you want to make changes, you are never locked into your original decisions. We also have a ton of tools to help us optimize for real time. because it's great if we can make something that looks fantastic, but it doesn't mean much if it doesn't actually work in our project. And on that note, SpeedTrees integrate seamlessly into Unity. You can use the export presets, and the wind and the LODs are all going to work out of the box. And it's the SpeedTree team, we're always pushing further into integrating SpeedTree even deeper into Unity. So we're excited for the things to come. And if all of that has you excited, definitely check out the SpeedTree demo. So you heard about Fantasy Kingdom in the keynote, then there's the URP Oasis and the Japanese Garden. All of these have SpeedTree in them, so you can get a better look at what's possible in Unity with SpeedTree. And one more thing is, if you want to know even more, we do have a SpeedTree YouTube channel where you'll find a lot of tutorials and live streams and just general education content so you can learn even more about SpeedTree. With that, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. I have a few QR codes for you. Thank you.